Hello, and welcome to another episode of Brettcast Movie and TV Talk. Can you believe that I have a third movie to talk about from when I was away for a few weeks? This time, it's not a hero movie or a Disney movie that I'm going to be talking about. What I am going to be talking about is what is described as a horror comedy that clocks in at about an hour and 20 minutes and is titled Red Snow. Now, this is not a movie I'd normally watch, but I was subjected to it. I thought going in that it was going to just be an awful movie, and coming out of it, I determined that it's a so bad it's good movie. The movie centers itself around our protagonist Olivia, who is a struggling novelist, which they show by having them show her reading a rejection letter from her publisher, which is one of the many letters we see. There is a little weird moment when she looks at this publisher letter. She reads it out at the mailbox. No one does that. Anyway, we get a little montage of her daily life, and then a bat hits her house. At first, she thinks it's totally dead, but then guesses it's not, so she Googles how to save a bat, and then she saves the bat. However, an odd thing is that after doing surgery on the bat, she decides to leave it in a cardboard box that, I'm not kidding, doesn't have any air holes. And it's how is the bat supposed to have any air circulation in the box when you don't put air holes in the box? The next day, there was a strange noise in the garage. Olivia grabs a comically oversized kitchen knife, walks out in the garage to see a totally naked vampire man laying on the floor, injured. This leads to the introduction of the character Julius King. He shows up at Olivia's house and asks her if she has seen three people, one of them being the vampire she has in the garage. But she tells the man no. He tries to be a little spooky by telling Olivia that vampires are totally real, but then plays it off as a joke. Later, Olivia takes some clothes out to Vampire Guy, who says he wants blood, and I'm not kidding, she actually manages to get it. She goes to the store, orders some meat from the meat counter, and asks the butcher guy for some blood, and he gives her pig's blood. And the strange thing is that when Olivia goes to give the vampire man the blood, she pours it into a coffee cup and warms it up in the microwave? What the fuck? Why are you warming up blood in the microwave? It's not fucking coffee. She gets our vampire back to where he's a bit more civil. We learn his name is Luke. He's a vampire. The funny thing about this meeting between Olivia and Luke is that Olivia just kind of sits there with the largest smile on her face. Remember how I said that she's a struggling novelist? Well, the book she keeps trying to get published is called Touched by a Vampire. So, she has a lot of questions for an actual vampire. And there's a funny moment in this movie when Olivia mentions Julius King, which causes Luke to tell Olivia that the organization King works for hunts down all these different, fantasy mythical creatures, just wipes them out, and there's a dialogue moment where he's like, yeah, they even wiped out the candy elves. The fuck is a candy elf? And Olivia's just like, oh my god, not the candy elves. He's like, yeah, and they're pretty fucking cool. Anyway, King eventually comes back to get Luke. King pins him down by using a cross, but then Olivia smacks King with a shovel, and right then and there Luke decides to kill King by sucking his blood, as a vampire does, and that really freaked Olivia out. Now at one point Luke tells Olivia that he's really bored out in her garage, so she gives him a copy of the manuscript for her book, Touched by a Vampire. Luke kind of ignores it until after the part where he kills King, and Olivia freaks out enough that she decides not to talk to him for a bit, though that doesn't really last because Luke reads her manuscript and lures Olivia into talking to him so he can give her criticism of her novel, and he does that. The next major plot point is when Luke, his two friends, Jackie and Brock, come up to check on Luke. Luke makes the mistake of letting the two in the house because Jackie uses her vampire super speed to run up to Olivia's room. Jackie tries to kill Olivia, but they end up letting Olivia leave because they know she'll come back. The three vampires take over Olivia's house. Meanwhile, Olivia takes King's car, which has a whole bag of items like crosses, stakes, and a crossbow that she knows just how to use. Olivia then ends up calling the company that King worked for and tries to get them to send another vampire hunter to her location, but the company wouldn't be able to send someone until like June, which obviously doesn't work for Olivia, which that obviously was supposed to be a moment of comedy, but that kind of missed. Olivia decides to take matters in her own hands, and she goes back to the house. There's an in-between moment where we get to see our vampire trio going hunting, and Luke ends up just like pulling a guy's head off to drink the blood, and then one of the other vampires decides to kick the head around like a hacky sack. There's also this weird implication that Luke is having sex with Jackie, because why not? Anyway, it comes down to Olivia versus our three vampires, and the fight's kind of funny. Like, she goes into the house, and Brock is asleep, and instead of just shooting him with the crossbow, she takes the sleeping bag with Brock in it, drags him all the way outside into the daylight. You have the crossbow, and he is asleep, deep sleep. Just fucking shoot him. And yeah, Brock wakes up and gets a little pain from the sun, but it ultimately doesn't do as much as I assume Olivia was expecting it to. She does shoot Brock with the crossbow, but she misses the shot, and he's standing like 3 feet in front of her. She manages to eventually kill him by taking the arrow out and stabbing Brock in the right spot. She goes into the house when Jackie comes down. Jackie does quite a bit of damage to Olivia, but Olivia does manage to kill Jackie. So now she's standing there, crossbow in hand, asking Luke if he's bad, just like the others. Luke says he's not, but then Olivia sees some clothing that she got him as a gift and decides to shoot him anyway. The movie ends by showing that she finally does become a successful novelist by publishing a completely different book called Season's Bleedings. The best part about the ending is that you think Luke is dead, but no. Olivia keeps him tied up and thirsting for blood as a method of giving feedback on her vampire novels. I think you can see now why this movie is so bad it's good. The funny thing is that the movie is unintentionally funny, which becomes weird when you Google the movie and see that it is supposed to be a horror comedy. I honestly would watch this again, and I can recommend it. I really can. Red Snow is actually a good and enjoyable movie. That's all I have to say, so if you added the conversation, leave a comment below. As always, thanks for listening, and goodbye.